The German General Staff had analyzed American military potential for decades, studying industrial statistics, observing National Guard maneuvers, and reviewing American military publications with the same precision they applied to every possible rival. Their conclusion, shared across European military circles, was that while the United States possessed immense industrial potential, it lacked genuine military discipline. Americans, they believed, were soft, individualistic, and unaccustomed to the rigid traditions that had shaped European armies for centuries. In 1941, the U.S. Army had only about 200,000 soldiers, armed with outdated equipment and led by officers whose combat experience went back to World War I. Germany had conquered Poland in weeks and France in 6 and appeared on the verge of defeating the Soviet Union before winter. When the United States entered the war after Pearl Harbor, German strategists factored this into their plans and concluded it changed little. They believed it would take America years to mobilize, train, and transport an effective army across the Atlantic, by which time Europe's fate would already be sealed. This conclusion would prove disastrously wrong, but the realization came not gradually. It struck suddenly, on specific occasions, when German forces encountered American operations that shattered every assumption they'd made. The first clues appeared not on the battlefield, but in intelligence reports about U.S. industrial output that analysts initially dismissed as exaggeration or propaganda. Reports claimed that American shipyards were launching Liberty cargo ships faster than U-boats could sink them. Aircraft factories in the United States were reportedly producing planes in monthly totals surpassing Germany's entire yearly output. Tank production figures sounded impossible, suggesting assembly line methods that treated armored vehicles like consumer cars. The numbers were verified through multiple intelligence channels, yet still seemed implausible to German planners used to European manufacturing limits. Germany, after all, had Europe's most advanced industrial base and had fully mobilized it for war, reaching production levels that exceeded its own expectations. Yet America's output appeared to be 3, 4, even 5 times higher in key areas, all while sending massive amounts of aid to Britain and the Soviet Union through Lend-Lease. The implications were alarming, though German leadership still believed the situation manageable in early 1943. In North Africa, U.S. forces suffered setbacks at Kasserine Pass and other early battles, reinforcing German beliefs about American inexperience and poor tactical skill. Veterans of the Eastern Front, who had faced relentless Soviet offensives, viewed Americans as less dangerous, better equipped perhaps, but lacking the ruthless endurance of the Red Army. They assumed American material superiority would be neutralized by German tactical mastery, better training, leadership, and fortified defenses. That confidence began to erode during the Sicilian and Italian campaigns, where American troops showed a troubling capacity to adapt, learn from mistakes, and unleash overwhelming firepower in quantities that Germans could scarcely imagine. The true shock came with the Normandy invasion on June 6, 1944, not during the initial beach assaults, where German defenders inflicted heavy losses, but in the days that followed, when they confronted the immense scale and efficiency of American military power. The invasion fleet itself was beyond comprehension. Thousands of vessels, from warships to landing craft, coordinated in the most complex operation ever attempted. Yet what truly astonished German commanders was not the scale alone, but how America's industrial might had been systematically harnessed to solve military challenges with a seeming disregard for cost, methods that appeared extravagant yet proved devastatingly effective. In Normandy, American forces fought with an approach that defied German military logic. Artillery ammunition was expended in staggering volumes, barrages so intense they used more shells in a few hours than some German divisions received in an entire month. When American infantry met resistance, they didn't charge recklessly forward. They called for artillery, air, tank, and even naval gunfire support when available, waiting as overwhelming firepower obliterated enemy positions before moving ahead. To German observers, this seemed cowardly or excessively cautious, the behavior of soldiers lacking confidence in their combat skills and compensating with sheer firepower. Yet the results spoke for themselves. American troops advanced steadily, taking far fewer casualties than equivalent German operations, grinding forward through Normandy's hedgerows slowly but relentlessly, while German defenders depleted their ammunition and received almost no reinforcements. The difference in logistical philosophies underscored a deeper contrast in how each nation waged war. German logistics emphasized precision and efficiency, calculating exactly what was needed for an operation, distributing resources carefully to avoid waste and sustain combat effectiveness. This system worked flawlessly as long as supply routes stayed intact and front lines held stable. The American approach was entirely different. It was built on abundance and redundancy, stockpiling massive quantities of supplies at every stage, accepting waste as a small price for ensuring constant readiness. For Americans, logistics wasn't about minimizing usage. It was about ensuring limitless flow. German quartermasters, witnessing these colossal supply depots, packed with fuel, ammunition, and spare parts, were stunned. It defied every rule of efficient logistics they knew. But this philosophy meant American forces were almost never short on supplies. They could fight at maximum intensity indefinitely and rely on tactics that consumed staggering amounts of material. The contrast in mobility was just as striking, perhaps even more decisive. By 1944, much of the German Wehrmacht still moved on foot or by horse-drawn wagons. Only a few elite units were fully motorized, and even they depended heavily on captured vehicles and dwindling fuel. Altogether, German forces in the West had roughly 2,000 operational tanks and assault guns, carefully conserved for critical battles. Meanwhile, by late summer 1944, the U.S. Army in France fielded over 10,000 tanks, with more arriving constantly. Every American unit, from division command to company level, was fully motorized, using standardized vehicles. When Americans needed to redeploy, they loaded into trucks and moved rapidly. When Germans needed to shift positions, they marched for days, arriving fatigued and in need of rest before fighting could even begin. This mobility gap gave the Americans a decisive edge. They could mass troops faster, exploit breakthroughs instantly, and maintain an operational rhythm the Germans could never match. The moment German commanders truly realized what they were up against came during Operation Cobra in late July 1944. The American breakout from Normandy tore apart the German defenses, turning a grinding stalemate into a fast-moving war of maneuver. U.S. forces amassed overwhelming strength at a narrow point, unleashed waves of saturation bombing from thousands of aircraft, and then surged through the breach with armored divisions advancing at full speed, bypassing resistance and plunging deep into the German rear. This was not victory through tactical genius, but through raw, concentrated power at levels the German army simply could not endure. Counterattacks were obliterated by American fighter bombers. Any attempt to form a defensive line was pounded into ruin by relentless artillery fire. Whenever German commanders tried to coordinate a response, American signals intelligence intercepted their plans and bombing raids disrupted their headquarters. Field Marshal Günther von Kluge in charge of German forces in France, sent increasingly frantic messages to Berlin, describing a situation slipping completely out of control. His army was being dismantled piece by piece, not in dramatic, decisive clashes, but through unending attrition that devoured divisions faster than replacements could arrive. Each engagement left German forces weaker, even when they achieved local tactical success. Every retreat meant abandoning valuable equipment that couldn't be recovered. Every defensive position, no matter how well fortified or bravely defended, was eventually crushed beneath the relentless weight of American firepower. Von Kluge's reports stressed that the issue was not German incompetence, but America's unmatched ability to sustain combat at levels of intensity that exhausted German forces. His soldiers fought with discipline, his officers were capable, and his defensive systems were sound. Yet none of it mattered against an enemy that could attack without pause, advance without rest, and maintain relentless pressure until German formations simply wore out. The pursuit across France in August 1944 revealed an American operational tempo that seemed to defy the limits of traditional military doctrine. U.S. armored divisions advanced hundreds of miles within mere days, maintaining both cohesion and combat effectiveness, even as their supply lines stretched all the way back to the Normandy beaches. The logistical effort behind this feat was astonishing. The famous Red Ball Express delivered thousands of tons of supplies daily, using dedicated truck convoys running nonstop. German troops tried repeatedly to establish defensive positions along river lines, only to discover that American forces had already crossed them, aided by aggressive reconnaissance and lightning-fast bridge construction. The speed and scope of these operations gave the impression that the American army had somehow escaped the ordinary constraints of logistics, terrain, weather, and fatigue that governed warfare. When German intelligence analyzed captured American documents, they found the reasoning behind this seemingly limitless capacity. U.S. planners calculated ammunition needs at 2 to 3 times what German doctrine considered the maximum sustainable rate. American logistics manuals prescribed supply reserves that German officers would have dismissed as reckless extravagance. U.S. maintenance protocols called for replacing worn-out machinery instead of repairing it, treating even complex vehicles and weapons as replaceable. Personnel policies rotated experienced combat troops back to training roles while fresh soldiers filled their places, ensuring units stayed effective even if it meant breaking up battle-tested teams. Every American procedure appeared to violate the German ideal of efficiency. Yet together they produced an army capable of fighting continuously at a pace the Wehrmacht could sustain only for short bursts before exhaustion set in. German commanders struggled to determine whether these were temporary advantages that superior skill might counter, or symptoms of a deeper imbalance that made American victory inevitable, regardless of German tactical success. Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt, recalled to command after von Kluge's death, reluctantly concluded the latter. In his analysis, America's material dominance was so absolute that German tactical brilliance could still yield local victories, but not alter the overall outcome. Every German success drained precious resources that could not be replaced, while the Americans simply committed new divisions drawn from an apparently endless reserve. The arithmetic was inescapable. Germany was steadily wearing itself out, while the United States only grew stronger. No level of battlefield expertise could offset that imbalance. The Ardennes Offensive in December 1944, Germany's last great gamble, was a desperate attempt to overturn this dynamic. Relying on surprise, bad weather to ground Allied aircraft, and a massive armored thrust meant to split American lines and seize vital supplies, the Germans launched their counterstroke. At first it worked. They broke through weak sectors, captured thousands of prisoners, and created a dangerous bulge in the Allied front. But within days, the flaws in German assumptions became clear. American troops encircled in Bastogne refused to surrender, holding firm despite being outnumbered and cut off. Reinforcements arrived with astonishing speed, entire divisions redeploying within 72 hours to contain the threat. When the skies cleared, American air power returned in overwhelming strength, devastating German columns and cutting off their supply routes. The offensive drained Germany's last reserves and achieved nothing lasting. U.S. losses were replaced within weeks, while American operations continued almost unaffected. The difference in how both sides absorbed and responded to setbacks revealed the fundamental divide between their military systems. One stretched to its breaking point, the other fueled by seemingly limitless depth and endurance. When German armies suffered defeats, they lacked the means to rebuild their strength, only shifting what remained of their forces to patch holes in the front. When American units took losses, replacement systems sent in new troops, supply chains delivered fresh equipment, and formations were restored to full strength before returning to battle. A German victory might wipe out a U.S. division, but that same division would reappear in the field within weeks. When the situation was reversed, however, the destruction of a German division was final. The result was a war of attrition that overwhelmingly favored the side with greater reserves, and America's advantage in resources was so immense that once its industry reached full capacity, the final outcome was never truly in doubt. German soldiers fighting Americans developed a grudging respect for the sheer material power of their opponent, even as they continued to believe in their own tactical superiority. Captured reports and letters from German troops revealed deep frustration at facing an enemy that could summon artillery or air support whenever pressed, that seemed to have endless ammunition and fuel, and that replaced losses overnight while German formations dwindled away. Veterans of the Eastern Front noted that Americans were less reckless than the Soviets, more cautious and unwilling to accept heavy casualties, but vastly better equipped and supported. Facing Russians meant enduring human waves. Facing Americans meant enduring crushing firepower that could obliterate any defensive position, given enough time and shells, and the Americans always seemed to have both. German professional officers could not help but admire the systematic precision of American warfare, even as it confounded them. The U.S. military applied industrial logic to combat, turning it into a process that could be standardized, taught, and reproduced. Training methods created capable soldiers rapidly through structured instruction rather than long service traditions. Logistics relied on assembly line efficiency to move mountains of supplies. Maintenance depended on standardized parts and rapid replacement instead of handcrafted repair work. American tactics focused on coordination and overwhelming firepower rather than on individual heroism. The entire system seemed engineered to reduce reliance on exceptional soldiers, to make ordinary men fight effectively through organization, planning, and support. To the German military mind, this was offensive, an affront to their culture of individual skill and martial pride. Yet it was precisely this system, built for reliability rather than brilliance, that generated unstoppable combat power. In the final months of the war, it became clear that German forces had no true answer to this method. Their experience and bravery prolonged the inevitable, but could not prevent it. German leaders knew the end had come, recognizing that continued resistance would only worsen the destruction. Yet they fought on, driven by duty, political coercion, or lingering faith in Nazi ideology. The contrast between the two nations' armies had never been more pronounced. Germany was deploying boys and old men in the Volkssturm, arming them with Panzerfausts and urging them to fight through fanaticism in place of training or equipment. America, by contrast, was fielding fresh, fully equipped divisions backed by an air force that dominated the skies and a logistics network that ensured every soldier was supplied more lavishly than even Germany's elite troops. The crossing of the Rhine in March 1945 symbolized the gulf between them. Germany defended the river with the desperation of a nation on the brink, committing its final reserves to hold the last barrier protecting its heartland. The Americans crossed through sheer weight of power, using more artillery and bombardment than the Germans could muster across the entire front, building bridges under fire with engineering feats that defied European imagination, and securing bridgeheads that no counterattack could dislodge. Within days, U.S. forces were sweeping across western Germany, meeting resistance that crumbled not from a single defeat, but from total exhaustion. The realization that America was unlike any previous enemy came not in one moment, but in countless instances. Intelligence officers confronted with production figures beyond belief, logisticians examining captured depots overflowing with supplies greater than entire German armies possessed, frontline commanders watching their defenses vanish under relentless bombardment, planners recognizing that U.S. replacements outpaced German losses and that American operations never paused while theirs slowed to a crawl. Most profoundly, Germany came to understand that the United States had built a military system fundamentally different from Europe's, a machine that merged industrial might with warfare so completely that traditional measures of military strength no longer applied. America had turned its vast economy into a weapon, one capable of spending freely in men, material, and time, because even staggering losses scarcely made a dent in its endless reserves.